Thank you all so much for being here for a special summertime Atlas Speaker Series event. I'm Jill Van Matry. I'm the Associate Director of the Atlas Institute. Can everyone hear me in the back? Okay, great. So throughout the year, Atlas hosts distinguished visitors from academia, industry, art, and other areas as part of our exploration of the ways in which technologies are shaping society. These presentations are an important resource for our students, our faculty, and for the broader Atlas community, of which many of you are part. Today's examples, in particular, explore the ways in which technology-informed art is created. We're grateful for the generosity of Adit Harel-Caperton and Anat Harel in supporting the Atlas Speaker Series. This afternoon, Atlas is pleased to welcome two of our favorite artists, instructors, and creative visionaries who have both undertaken extraordinary projects that we'll hear about shortly. They share one other important characteristic. They're both helping Atlas to explore the role of our Atlas Faculty Fellows. Their work tonight is possible partly because of Atlas funding, and we couldn't be more proud to support them or more grateful to them for helping us to better shape our Atlas Faculty Fellows program. And with that, I will introduce them both. Mark Amerika is perhaps best known as a remix artist, one who reconfigures existing cultural content and mainstream media into new forms of art. His unique perspectives have influenced a new generation of artists using digital processes to create art forms that intersect at the boundary of visual art, performance, cinema, and experimental literature. Mark's new project, Museum of Glitch Aesthetics, was commissioned in conjunction with the 2012 Cultural Olympiad in London. Software programs like Google Earth and Google Street View are creatively repurposed to invent new forms of art, such as Google Street Photography, 8-bit digital painting, and live Google Earth remixing. We're proud to include him as a member of the CU faculty in the Art and Art History Department and as a faculty fellow here at the Atlas Institute. Our second speaker today will be Michael Theodore, a well-known musician, artistic collaborator, and multimedia artist. He's also an Atlas faculty fellow and the director of Atlas's Center for Media Arts and Performance, and a faculty member of the Department of Music, where he teaches composition. In field theory, his recent exhibit at the CU Art Museum, Michael builds kinetic sculptures with software and hardware to better explore perceptual sensations. Using various media, he creates dynamic fields of color, light, and sound that are inspired by experiences with the natural world. His works and performances with sound, visual media, or both have been presented and performed internationally. Following their remarks, we hope you'll stay for a casual reception in our lobby. And at 5:30, Michael Theodore will then lead a group over to the CU Art Museum next door for a guided tour of his exhibit there. Please help me in giving a warm welcome to our first, Mark Amerika.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Jill. It's great to be here. Before I start, I would like to thank Atlas, and in particular John, Jill, Stephanie, and the entire Atlas team for making this event happen. It's really great to be a part of such an important speaker series right here on our home turf. As a faculty member in the Department of Art and Art History, who has been affiliated with Atlas since 1999, meaning the Millennium Project, I not only want to thank Atlas for organizing today's program, celebrating some of the practice-based research in art and technology that takes place here at CU, but I also want to welcome you all to today's series of events. The last few years have seen a great convergence of cultural programming take place here in the Boulder-Denver metro region. And isn't it cool to call it the Boulder-Denver metro region? This convergence of activity, perhaps I should pluralize it, these convergences include many exciting developments that we should go out of our way today, I think, to acknowledge, just so that we can very briefly bring into view how our region has successfully put itself on the map, both nationally and I would say internationally, in the expanding fields of digital art and performance. We can start by highlighting the many great things happening here at Atlas. And in the sphere of digital arts and technology, I'm especially thinking of the plenitude of performances and events that take place inside the Black Box Theater, under the direction of one of my favorite contemporary artists, who also happens to be my CU colleague who will be presenting after me, Michael Theodore. His monumental new exhibition work, Swarm, is now on exhibit at the CU Art Museum, and as Jill mentioned, we'll soon get a special guided tour by him. The Black Box is many things at once, at least to me as both a CU faculty artist and instructor and researcher. It's a venue for multimedia performances conducted by national and international artists, but it's also an experimental learning environment for all manner of practice-based research that takes place at the interface of visual art, performance, dance, music, sound art, live audio-visual remixing, digitally expanded forms of cinema and installation, and thanks to the ingenuity of some of our best grad students who embrace these emerging technologies, new forms of electronic literature never before imagined. This multiple set of convergences that I'm referring to is being driven by a number of visionary figures here at CU, as well as current and most definitely former students from CU, as well as colleagues from the Denver area. For example, I'm thinking of Lisa Becker, the director of the CU Art Museum, who continues to devote a serious chunk of her exhibition programming to cutting-edge digital artwork that experiments with new media technologies. Michael's exhibition is a case in point. His Swarm exhibition is the first in a series of exhibitions in the new Art Techne series at the museum that will feature new media artwork by Colorado artists whose national and international reputations are raising the visibility of contemporary arts practice, the kind of contemporary arts practice that we are literally inventing here in the States. It's totally vital that we continue to find ways to support the development of an eventual exhibition and or performance of the dynamic artwork Colorado's digital artists are manifesting as a result of immersing ourselves in the creative potential of making things at the interface of experimental art, science, the humanities, and technology. These collaborative ventures can lead to the creation of many different kinds of artworks that play with a variety of media formats, genres, and technologies, including robotics, interactive video, the internet, mobile phone and tablet applications, games, transmedia narrative, live audiovisual events like the kind we get to experience at community festivals such as our own Boulder-based Communikey, directed by Kate Lesta, and that this past April featured a wide array of young electronic sound artists, as well as some of the senior figures in the field. And I'm thinking of artists like Laurie Anderson and Morton Subotnick, who performed here in Atlas just in April. There's lots of innovative and collaborative interdisciplinary research in experimental forms of digital art, multimedia performance, and electronic literature that takes place right here at CU, and that will inevitably feed into yet deeper research into future forms of personal expression and creativity. For example, what about the aesthetic potential of experimenting with DIY forms of vernacular video and social media protocols as a space for the transmission of avant-garde performance art? What would that look like? Actually, look no further than the incredible series of YouTube videos by our award-winning Knight Fellow, USA Knight Fellow, and CU faculty artist Michelle Ellsworth, and you'll know exactly what I mean. When it comes to experiments in contemporary art and technology, Colorado is on a roll. Last year, we had the Blink, Light, Sound, and Moving Image exhibition at the Denver Art Museum, which included a multitude of works gifted by the visionary Boulder art collectors Mark and Polly Addison. Mark and Polly are nationally known as two of the most important early collectors of significant works of internet art. And as for DAM, Their Fusebox gallery is devoted to a continuous stream of innovative artworks made primarily via digital processes. Next week, here in Boulder, the Boulder Museum of Contemporary Art, the MOGA, in conjunction with the Brackage Center and other local funders, will launch the opening of Visual Rhythm, an exhibition which will include work from former students like Rick Silva and other Colorado-based and national artists who, as jazz musician Ornette Coleman likes to say, play to play. As the MOGA site says, I'm just going to quote from it, Visual Rhythm presents non-narrative, abstract, and immersive experimental film, video, and digital art, connecting recent directions in media art to earlier modes of expression. Meaning that there's a deep history to this kind of work and the aesthetic sensibilities that inform its eventual production and distribution. And in this case, the exhibition looks to the visual lyricism of the legendary filmmaker Stan Brakhage, whose presence here on the CU campus, along with other former CU faculty members, artists such as Ron Sukanik, Betty Woodman, Steve Katz, and Ed Dorn, has built our campus's reputation nationally and internationally as a national center for the experimental arts. Now, I mention all this because for me today, our events here are a kind of celebration of how Boulder, Denver, and the community at large has come to embrace these often uncategorizable forms of art, as well as the kind of practice-based research that we conduct here at CU and that is supported by Atlas and the Center for Media Arts and Performance, the Center, the CU Art Museum, the Center for the Humanities and the Arts, etc. Not to mention the departments that we hail from and the colleges, the College of Music in the case of Michael's case. For me, it's the Department of Art and Art History, where, for my research, it's the hub of creative action for the experimental arts across a wide swath of disciplinary practices, and is the primary location for all things related to EDAS, the Experimental Digital Arts Studio, and the TechNate Practice-Based Research Initiative in the Digital Arts, two ventures that I started way back in the year 2000. The successful, and keep this word in mind for where I'm going, successful evolution of practice-based research in art and technology here at CU, a great deal of which takes place here in Atlas, and particularly in the back box, actually relates to my latest artwork, which I'm now going to briefly give you an overview of. It's called the Museum of Glitch Aesthetics. And I actually just released it Friday on the internet as part of Abandoned Normal Devices, and which is in Manchester, UK. And I'll tell you more about them in a bit too. Now, as with a lot of complex, let's even call them difficult to explain research outcomes, Museum of Glitch Aesthetics, or what I like to call MOGA, is not an artwork that can be easily summarized in a few sound bites and that one can experience in a few minutes, get a feel for what the artist is trying to say or not, and then walk away from it. Well, I'm sure there'll be some people who will walk away from it. Check their email, check their Twitter stream. It's on the internet. But given the sheer volume of work collected on this project website at glitchmuseum.com, there are over 25 works of art, including lots of digital videos, an album-length work of sound art posing as a comedy album, plus the originally designed and composed 86 full color catalog. Going through the entire project so you can just get a sense of all the work and how it is being canonized and historicized by the various characters who direct, curate, write about, and gift works to this virtual museum will take at least 5 to 7, maybe 8 hours. And that's just to get a sense of what the work is about. To really dig out its potential meaning, it would take much more time. And in this regard, you might say it's like reading a good-sized literary novel, and may in fact be an indication of where the so-called literary novel is going. I mean, hopefully it's going somewhere, because a novel is supposed to be novel, no? As part of a very brief intro to the project, I'd like to show you what I'm calling the video art trailer. So what does that mean? The video art trailer for the artwork. Can you imagine Picasso or Mark Rothko creating a video art trailer for their new painting? How about a video art trailer for a Rauschenberg Combine, or even a TV sculpture by Namjoon Paik? I'd like to think that if they were just now emerging as artists in the contemporary digital landscape, that maybe they would create a video art trailer, but probably not. I mean, why bother? Would that really change the math in terms of what the art market's ultimate concern is, i.e. the making of a shiny buck on someone's cleverly executed aesthetic output? Of course, a seasoned intermedia pro like Marina Abramović or an on-fire rising art star like Ryan Tricarton probably would create a video art trailer for their next work. It's possible. Anyway, the video art trailer I'm going to show you, it's just a little over 2 minutes for MOGA, is really a kind of, well, I'd have to call it a lie. Like all video art trailers are lies. It's not really indicative of what it will be like to experience this work in its entirety. But maybe that doesn't matter, because the video art trailer for MOGA is now itself part of the Museum of Glitch Aesthetics. That is to say, it's part of the package of material that encompasses this work of visual, conceptual, and performance art, and so represents one possible entry into this vast field of interpretive potential that is the work of art, one initial way of experiencing the work. So with that in mind, if all things are working, we're going to get this going. And it's available on YouTube here, just so that you know. So this project, Museum of Glitch Aesthetics, also known as MOGA, is part of the Abandoned Normal Devices, and identifies themselves, and I'm quoting their website, as, quote, a catalyst for production and experimentation, a festival that questions the norm and champions a different approach to new cinema and digital culture, and that presents itself as a playful and political investigation into current social, artistic, and technological practice, enabling collaboration between the arts and the digital, science, design, and media sectors. The Ann Festival, who I am eternally grateful for having commissioned MOGA, and here I should also acknowledge that research devoted to the project has also been sponsored by Atlas, and was inspired by the London 2012. And in fact, all of its commissions, such as Museum of Glitch Aesthetics, are funded by Legacy Trust UK, the cultural legacy program for the London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games. Since their inception in 2009, every year AND has a new program theme. And this year's theme is success? The question mark. And so I was challenged with having to create an elaborate art project that would contribute to this significant, some would say historical, cultural legacy associated with the games, as well as take into account this idea of success. Also, given Ann's remit as a festival of new cinema, digital culture, and art, the ideal work would be produced by experimenting with various new media technologies and digital processes. So this subject, success, is one I just love to play around with. I mean, in artistic terms, what does it mean to be a success? In the old days, which, by the way, are still these days, the days we live in now, because life itself and our historical presence are by nature atemporal. In the old days, we used to, and still today, call an artist a success when they produce artwork that is sanctioned by the art markets and art critics and art historians who have themselves successfully found a way to historicize and canonize this artwork that is consequently deemed successful, and that we, the makers and appreciators of art, then attribute to a specific artist who, by association with the successful artwork, is then themselves considered a success. Or is it the other way around? I mean, who is responsible for an artist's success? This is an important question, especially when taking into account the game of art and the highly competitive art market. Now, of course, when it comes to practice-based research into art and the increasing role technology plays in the creative process, I, on occasion, have major issues with these markets, these historicizations, these canonizations. But then again, I would. And that's because I create most of my art for the internet. And so in general, art on the net, or net art, is more connected with the so-called gift economy than it is anything even remotely resembling the upmarket and somewhat elitist commodity culture that members of the art world circulate in. So Museum of Glitch Aesthetics as an art project is first and foremost an investigation of what it means to be a successful artist before, during, and after a time in art history when artists, entrepreneurs, and creative types of all kinds are inventing new ways to develop alternative practices that disrupt the hedge fund environment the art market has become, and that the studio art model has been a bit too complicit with. And so this challenge I presented myself, that is to investigate notions of success in relation to the contemporary art scene as it interfaces with the technological realities of what, for lack of better, we call Web 2.0, led to the creation of a distributed team of collaborators who would contribute to the MOGA story, or what we like to call transmedia narrative. With the Museum of Glitch Aesthetics, we decided to create first an online museum. And this would be an online museum devoted to one artist, the kind of sort of experience you have when you visit, say, the Clyfford Still Museum in Denver. In fact, if you visit the Clyfford Still Museum website, they introduce the entire museum by pointing to, quote, an artist whose life has been shrouded in mystery. But this museum of Glitch Aesthetics, is actually devoted to one morphing artist who, the more you dig into the transmedia narrative content, could just as easily be many artists. Or, given the flood of data now circulating in the networked and mobile media culture, the one artist featured at MOGA could literally be any artist. Or, if you want to get poetic and sample from the spirit of E.E. Cummings, we could see this artist of Glitch Aesthetics as an every-only recombinant artist. Love is the every-only recombinant artist, to remix E.E. Cummings. But for narrative purposes, we focused on one particular trajectory and referred to the artist simply as the artist 2.0, which features, so the Museum of Glitch Aesthetics features the life and work of the artist 2.0, which I think you caught in the video art trailer. We started the project by simultaneously building out what eventually became the full-color 86-page catalog, museum catalog, and the various works that would represent the career or the early to mid-career trajectory of this mythological artist figure. Going through the site, you will see representative examples of the early works, like digitally manipulated still images and animated GIFs that we think first appeared on early 2.0 web platforms like MySpace and Flickr and Blogger. After these early works, we find that the artist then took a huge personal risk, and went to art school, where in addition to a pre-Tumblr digital photo blog devoted to handmade glitch images, he began developing his experimental mobile phone and glitch videos that would then appear on sites like YouTube and Vimeo. And later in the story, we find that he uploads his collaborative glitch soundtracks over distribution channels like SoundCloud and Bandcamp. In this regard, the main idea spurring on the Museum of Glitch Aesthetics team was to find something like an intersubjective sensibility that would enable us to collaboratively generate one practice-based research stream that would investigate the relationship between creating works of art, transmitting works of art, streaming works of art, exhibiting works of art, digitally archiving and or collecting works of art, and finally, historicizing and canonizing works of art, which mostly means writing about them and locating other texts supposedly written by the artist. In other words, by looking closely at the relationship between creation, transmission, historicization, and canonization, we wanted to tease out the possibilities of a glitch aesthetics, the aesthetics of corrupt and or corrupting data. We thought that these user-generated content sharing sites that I just mentioned would be a really good environment to problematize this idea of the solo artist exhibiting one's work as an individual studio artist genius in specific physical locations at a particular point in time. Although, as you read through the MOGA narrative in the catalog, you will find that the artist goes against his own mythological hype and does in fact occasionally exhibit and perform his work in mainstream and alternative museums, galleries, and clubs. So another question we were looking at then was how will the digital archiving and collection process, as well as the ongoing attempt to historicize and canonize some works of art while conveniently marginalizing others, change with the advent of networked and mobile media communication devices? And how does this change? How does this change the potential audience for this kind of artwork? And somewhere in the background, we were also asking, how does this change the way we need to teach contemporary art practice and theory? And do we need to change it at all? So when you come to the homepage of the site, which I'll bring up real quick, it's at glitchmuseum.com. There it is. You'll find an extended excerpt from the exhibition catalog there, which is available as a free ebook download or a limited availability print edition. And here I'd like to also add that both the website and the catalog have been beautifully designed by the Atlas TAM, Technology, Arts, and Media Program Director Joel Swanson, who, in addition to being one of the principal collaborators forming the Artist 2.0 Collector, was, it should be noted, the first art and art history undergrad to graduate from CU with top honors, featuring an elaborate work of digital art as the centerpiece of his honors thesis. Perhaps the first CU student to ever graduate summa cum laude with a digital submission. But we will have to check the archives before we can start to historicize and canonize our former students. So I can see that I'm almost at 4:30, so I want to end by showing you just an excerpt from one of the videos in this collection. It's in the HD streaming section, which is right here. HD streaming, of course, referring to high definition. And it's the video that appears right at the end of the video art trailer. the shot of the raging waterfall being captured by an iPhone cleverly nestled inside the rocks at the, for now, undisclosed location. So think of this as an opportunity to just kick back, Zen-like, for a few minutes, like you will in Michael's exhibition as well, and meditate on the glitch transmission, which may or may not signal modes of corruption while seeing. Imagine yourself seeing the way digital devices see, and maybe also listen. The piece is called Falls from Grace, or The Future of Water. Does anybody know where that was? Boulder Falls? Yeah. So what was the Artist 2.0, whose story starts in the northwest of England, where the Olympic torch just passed through this past weekend in Manchester, doing in the Boulder area? That's all part of the story that you'll find when you dig deeper into the site, and especially the catalog, which to some might read like a literary novel. So I'm going to end with a quote from the Artist 2.0 in a short interview that's published in the catalog. The Artist 2.0 says, "The flow of data, the water of information, is continuous, and I am a multi-layered part of the mix. The flow does not ever really need me, but I totally need it. It roots me. It channels my creativity in ways I have no control over." So I think I'll end it there. That's a good segue into Michael's work. Thank you.
First thing I just wanted to say was it's wonderful to hear Mark talk about this moment that we're having in Boulder right now. And it's not just a moment, really, because it's a legacy also of work that goes back for decades. In particular, the experimental tradition in Boulder is really a nationally and internationally significant force. And so I think what we're seeing right now is a resurgence of that, and it's very exciting to be here on account of that. And so before I start talking, I wanted to thank the Atlas Institute, particularly John and Jill, for supporting the research that made the work in the museum possible. I wanted to thank Dan Scher, Dean of the College of Music, and also the College of Music, for the incredible flexibility that they have shown to me for the 14 years that I've been working here as I've explored various creative directions. I wanted to thank Lisa Becker from the CU Art Museum and also the entire staff of the CU Art Museum, who's just been extraordinary to work with and such a beautiful space to be in. And I wanted to thank CU for a seed grant that made a lot of the work possible as well, in terms of just the considerable amount of materials that were required. So I'm going to now just give you a little backdrop I'm trying to answer sort of the frequently asked questions that people have when they come to the museum. So they're sort of like this. What were you thinking is the first one. And then the second one is, you're a musician, how does that relate to this? And so I'm going to try to give a backdrop for that, and then I'm also just going to give you a little window into the making of each piece. There's basically 4 main projects that are in the museum that you'll see. So I'm just going to first start with the backdrop for what I was thinking. And I think it's because I've been living in Boulder, as I said, for 14 years. It's fairly cosmic. So I'm going to take you out to the edges of the universe, but first I'm going to start with something that has a particular resonance to me growing up as a kid in the 70s, but it may not mean anything to you if you're not familiar with the Muppets. But there was an article that came out in Slate magazine, I think it was the week before last or something like that, which actually I realized had this kind of profound connection to everything that I was thinking of. And basically it was a philosophy of life that said that you are either a chaos Muppet or an order Muppet. And it's important to know your type, and that really in the end both types are necessary for creative work to happen. So on the left we have Animal, who's sort of the paradigm, if you will, of the chaos Muppet, who just look at him. I mean, you don't really need to say much more. Just the expression says it all. And then you've got Kermit the Frog, who needs everything to be in a row to get the show to happen. And so if you didn't have the sort of creative, rambunctious wildness of Animal balanced by the Kermit the Frogs out there to really rein it all in and harness it into some kind of usable form, we would have a much less rich experience of life. And so Bert and Ernie kind of sum up that balance necessary. Bert is the chaos Muppet, whereas Ernie is the order Muppet, and together they have a thriving, if somewhat controversial, relationship. So So anyway, I read that article after writing this artist statement, which is maybe sounds more pretentious in a way, but I think it's essentially saying the same thing. So I'm gonna read this, and this is what's in the museum. Quantum physics tells us that both time and space, when viewed at the tiniest microscales, are a frothy foam of random turbulence. And yet, because of certain mysterious fundamental constants, the speed of light, the force of gravity, etc., order emerges throughout the universe on many scales and in both living and inorganic matter. Inspired by the rhythms, cycles, patterns, and flow of the natural world, the sound of rain striking a surface, leaves rustling in the wind, the rush of a flock of birds, field theory is an investigation of the fertile interstitial boundary between order and disorder. All of the separate pieces have the same basic strategy, and here I'm speaking of the 4 separate projects that are part of the show. A set of fundamental building blocks is chosen for purely aesthetic reasons, and then placed in a, quote, field that, while always preserving at least the outlines of perceptible patterns, insistently pushes and pulls towards a beckoning disorder. So just diving into that a little bit further, what I'm talking about there is that when you look at, and this is for those keeping track at home, this is only referring to stuff below the Planck length. But if you examine space, we think of, so if you imagine empty space, it seems like it's probably the most stable thing out there. It's just empty space. There's nothing there, right? It's just this, what's happening? Nothing. But if you look at it closely enough, you find that it's just this frothy sea of change where, if you look at it on a small enough scale, the very size of space is randomly fluctuating. So what we call nothingness is not really nothing at all. It's just this incredible ferment of activity. The same is true of time at the smallest scale too. You can't measure, time is moving back and forwards in random ways as well. So down at the bottom of everything is this extraordinary level of turbulence, no matter where you look, which is absolutely fascinating to me and something that I think about I probably need to see a shrink, actually. Yet, given that everything is turbulent at that lower scale, it's this extraordinary feature of our universe that because of these things, and we don't know why they're there, all of this order just emerges and bubbles up, and so, on all these different scales. So you have the scale of the galaxy, you have a hurricane formation, and then you have a nautilus shale, all displaying the same types of patterns that emerge from, again, something that at its core is deeply turbulent. And so you find that nature has these kind of favorite tunes that it plays over and over. The spiral was one of them, but this kind of branching structure, actually, anyone want to hazard a guess what those, there's 2 pictures there, what those are? Mud on the right, yes, 50 points, and on the left, leaf, yeah. So this is the branching of the leaf, so pretty small scale, and then that's a desert viewed from an airplane or something. So again, there are these changes that nature keeps ringing over and over and over again that bubble up out of these constants, but it all wants to come crumbling down. In the end, it's very hard. Even though the order bubbles up, there are all these forces pushing against it continuously. So that's really more gravity than entropy, I suppose. But the point is that once you get a stable configuration, there's something that's always pushing it towards instability. And that's at the core of what I was trying to explore in this show, was setting up a stable pattern and then letting it descend into chaos. Or almost descend into chaos. And so there's not really time to go. This is probably a much longer talk, so I'm going to actually go really quickly through some of these things. But this whole idea of the shapes and the patterns that you find in nature really became like a big hit in the 19th century. And so, and got the fancy title Morphology. And so there are these amazing books like Darcy Thompson's On Growth and Form that show on the left-hand side ink getting dispersed in water, and then the actual form of a jellyfish. And he draws all these very mystical connections between the resemblances. Told you it was very cosmic. I'll just scooch through some of these. And so this is a picture I took when I was on a hike with my son in the sand dunes down south from here in Colorado. And one of the things that I wanted to just get across with this, because this is part of my trajectory and how I came from being a musician to also including all the other things that I'm interested in. I just want to mention how I'm thinking of patterns, and that way I think about patterns comes out of that 19th century work that I was just referring to. So the way I'm using the word pattern is that it's a feature that recurs, quote unquote, regularly, but not necessarily identically or symmetrically. So in this case, I think we'd all agree that there's a pattern there, but it's not a pattern like you'd see in a lot of kind of wallpaper where you have like exactly regularly things repeating. That's very easy to say, oh, there's, you know, a circle every ½ inch or something. We would all agree that's a pattern. I think we'd all agree this is a pattern, although it never repeats itself in exactly the same way. And part of the reason that we call it a pattern is that it has these subcomponents, which I'm going to call forms, which are the characteristic shape of a group of objects. So each of these individual ripples I would call the generating form, and then when you put all those things together, you create a pattern. So this is a little confusing because in music we call form is something else, but for my purposes, this is how I'm thinking of things. And so we try to make patterns all the time, and this is actually where I think I was noticing a connection between Mark's work and the kinds of things that I'm thinking about. He's exploring what happens. One of the things he's exploring is when you have noise in the system, what that does for you. And so here, it is a biological imperative that we are able to predict seasons and that we know where to go to find food and so forth, that we understand the cycles and rhythms of the natural world. And so here, you're all able to read this, right? You're smarter than 50% or 55%, no, 45% of the other people, I assure you. But this is an example of our mind always is striving to find the patterns, whatever the source of information. Okay, and so this is now getting into how did I come to be interested in the things I'm interested in now. About 20 years ago, when I was studying music composition at the university, and that's what my formal training is as a composer, I realized that I was working with certain fundamental patterns over and over again. And I thought to myself, computers are really good at helping you define what a pattern is and then explore variations of those patterns. And so I started writing programs that would take a melody that I had maybe written on the piano and then spit out thousands and thousands of variations of that. And then I would go through and listen to those, and I'd say, yeah, that one's pretty good, that one's not so good, and keep rewriting the software until I got something that I was happy with. And so I used that as a tool for composing. It's basically an assistant who worked for a very low wage and long hours. And so this is actually something that's been done by musicians for a very, very long time. And Mozart, for instance, worked with this kind of musical dice game where he would get these are the building blocks, each one of those, and then through this kind of ingenious method of recombining them, you come out with an actual piece of music. But there's millions and millions of different variations that are possible through playing games like this. So each little aspect of the pattern is not significant in itself, but it's the way that they can be recombined. And so that interest in what are the defining features of patterns and how can they be transformed through variation and recombined is the through line that has informed all of my work since then and continues to. So one of the things that I realized about 10 or 12 years ago is I've been doing all this work with composing with computers. I thought, and I wasn't the first person to think of this, but I felt the reality of this, which is that to a computer, it doesn't really care what you're working with. It doesn't matter if it's a sound, if it's a color, if it's a video. The computer's just dealing with zeros and ones. Who cares what the end result is? So the same kind of process that worked in terms of composing music was actually something that you could use to, for instance, create video with. And so it's controlling signals in time and patterns unfolding in time. And so I started making videos that went with the music that I was creating using very similar kind of process. And over time, that interest in creating video grew until recently I started thinking, well, you could create still images out of that same process as well. So in the museum, you'll see this is a machine that I commissioned from a group. That's not such a great picture. It was my friend's cell phone. From a group of recent CU engineering grads, and it's not running at the moment, but if we have time during the tour, I'll set it up and run it. And what it's doing are making these drawings, and I'm just going to quickly show you how these drawings are put together. So there are about 5 different kinds of styles of drawing that are on display in the museum right now, and one of them comes from this grid structure, which is inspired by a very common device in architecture, this diagrid structure. And so I'm going to take you through the steps of making one of the drawings. Basically what I start with is essentially just a perfectly regular grid. But from each point in the grid, then there's radiating these semi-random lines. It's a little hard to see maybe, but yeah. Is that better? Yeah, so you can see these are the points, and then there's just these little curly-Q things that come out. But then, starting from that, I, in writing software, start to push and pull all these things in this dimension and in that dimension. And so if I push them a little bit more, they start to take on some forms. I push them a little bit farther, then more forms emerge. Push them even farther still, starts to look like that. And then eventually, this is one of the drawings that's in the museum that is created through writing software, but then drawn with a pen on a piece of foam. So there's a whole bunch of other drawings that take place with other processes. Here, oh boy, I was going to show you, I'll just show you really quickly because it's kind of interesting. At least I think so, but of course I would think so because I spend all my time doing this. Your mileage might vary. This is a program that I used. Actually, there's a series of videos that are in the museum as well, and so this is a program that I used to create some of these videos, but I'm actually going to use it right now to just demonstrate a process that was also part of one of the drawings. So here I am creating a perfectly regular plane, and then I'm going to have a series of points, and actually I'm going to make the plane just look a little nicer by smoothing it. Okay, so here I've got a series of points, and I'm just going to go in and grab a few of them, and then maybe just pull it up like that. I don't know if you can see, I've created a disturbance in the force. So there's like a little disturbance, and then maybe I might create another one over here. Push this one down. Right? So you can see that I've now just changed the surface. I just started with something flat, but I pushed and pulled it in 3 dimensions. So this drawing, how do I get back to someone who actually uses PowerPoint? How do I get back to like the full? What?
Go to where you were, slideshow.
Slideshow.
And then use slideshow.
Use view slideshow. Thank you. All right, that's cool. I can get there quickly. So that process that I just showed you of pushing and pulling in 3 dimensions, this is a flat piece of gator foam that was drawn on with a pen, and it's basically that technique that I just showed you, but done. It's a process that extends indefinitely this way and that way, and I just essentially decided where to put a frame around it, just on aesthetic choices. Here is the similar kind of process. This is a piece of scratch board it's basically an engraving technique where I'm just scratching away a layer of ink that's on top of clay. So it has this dimensional effect, which is entirely an illusion of taking a 3-dimensional process and projecting it onto 2 dimensions. Let's see. I really don't have so much time, so I'm just gonna skip ahead to show you a little bit of the genesis of a couple other projects, and then there's like food and stuff. So one of the biggest projects in this is something called Swarm Wall, and that started this video here, and people think that I had some kind of hostile intention with those, and I was actually just experimenting with something that was not a pole. But the first idea that I had was this kind of visual image where it's these series of objects that are rotating around, I guess sort of like the Rockettes, but more slowly. And so that was where things started. And then in discussing this with my colleague Nicholas Carell in the computer science department, and discussing it further with visiting researcher Ken Sugawara, who's here from Japan for this year, we started to talk about, instead of these kinds of cycles that I had going, looking into flocking as a metaphor for what the behavior of the wall is. And so, and this is a flock of starlings. And so, oh yeah, that's me with all the tubes. This is showing the genesis of this piece, but I wanted to get to there. So my colleague, Nicholas Carell, designed these custom circuit boards over in his lab in the engineering building. And the beautiful thing about these, his interest is in, he wants to send a whole bunch of robots into a building to rescue people, little robots, and he doesn't want to have to tell them what to do. He just wants to say, hey, go rescue this person. So they all need to think for themselves. And so this is a concept called spatial computing, where each one of these, rather than driving this whole process with one central brain, basically each node makes its own decisions and then sends messages to its neighbors. And so you can see there, they're connected to 6 or to 5 of their neighbors. So the swarm wall, damn me. Do it again. I'm not going to ask you how to do it again. I'm just going to go back. See, I won't remember that. The swarm wall is constructed out of all these little tubes that are then assembled onto this gigantic structure that the incredibly brilliant folks at the museum assembled, and then that we nailed on in all these panels. And there I am with my colleague John, struggling to get the glue on against gravity. So anyway, the point is, the surface of the wall is intended to be fully random in terms of the way we put it on, but there's no way to look at it without filling in, your brain again fills in all sorts of ordered patterns. The final thing I was just going to show you was this was a sketch that I had of a piece that you'll see, another room-sized piece in the back gallery in the museum. And this was, again, on my computer, thinking about it. Here's the, again, amazing crew putting this together, and then there's what it wound up being. So anyway, that's a quick and scattered tour through the questions of what were you thinking and how did you wind up here. And if there are questions, I'll be happy to, over food or at the museum, talk with them. But thanks so much for listening.